Lord knows, I'm having a bit of It's a mark button. Hi, yeah, good evening everybody, good evening. I just want to begin by saying thank you so much for everybody that's turned out tonight. So my name's Robbie and I'm the Student and Youth Engagement Officer at Hope for the Future. It seems like this event couldn't really have come at a better time, not only just because of the floods that we'd experienced last night in Sheffield, where we had half a month's rain in a day. Communities have been damaged, and events like these are only going to become more commonplace once we experience the change that climate change is making to the planet. But not only that, we've got a general election confirmed for the 12th of December, and events like these are really, really important to make people aware of policy, people to engage with their candidates, people to engage with the wider political process. And just to make a note on the election, there is still a lot of time to wait to register. Registration stops on, I think, the 29th of November, so if you haven't already registered, then it would be really good to do that. But sort of the thinking behind this event was that it's Parliament Week, which for those of you that don't know, is a week which seeks to celebrate the role that Parliament plays in our country, the engagement that happens between people from all backgrounds and Parliament. So as part of Hope for the Future's wider recognition of celebrating politics, we thought it'd be really good to have this event on. But most importantly, over the past 18 months, climate awareness has surged, particularly amongst groups of young people. But with that said, young people are mobilising en masse at these climate demonstrations, and it's been especially busy because of things like that for Parliament, who, despite being consumed so oftenly by Brexit, have passed net zero, legally binding net zero targets, have passed the climate emergency. And more closely to home in Sheffield, the City Council has even declared a climate emergency. The University of Sheffield has committed to embedding an ethos of sustainability within its teaching and management practices. So it really, really appears that climate change is beginning to receive the local, national and international recognition which it so rightly deserves. But despite all of this, many groups of people within society continue to feel disengaged and alienated by the climate movement. And it's our responsibility to ensure that as a movement, it remains accessible and we empower people to engage within the democratic process. At Hope for the Future, we've been working now for over 6 years to equip individuals, communities and campaign groups with the tools to make their voices heard and to show that the issue of climate change transcends that of class, ethnicity, gender and political persuasion. And we've also been working to enable people to communicate the urgency of climate change with representatives from up and down the country. But there's still so much more to be done before real climate action is ever achieved. We as individuals are often asked what we do or what we can do to alleviate the impacts of the climate crisis, often through lifestyle changes such as travel and dietary choices. But we as individuals rarely ask what our MPs or our MEPs, councillors or candidates are doing, what they support, what things that can be done to ensure that climate action is achieved. Through our many projects, Hope for the Future work in over 100 constituencies and ensure that every MP engagement leads to a tangible outcome through training thousands of campaigners every year in the relationship building approach. Myself and Emma, the events coordinator here at Hope for the Future, would like to thank SMK for allowing us to put on this event for free and to ensure that our engagement programs continue to be put on for free. We'd really appreciate it if at the end of the night you could donate any spare change to us in one of the buckets, which will be at one of the 2 doors. Just to make some sort of like housekeeping rules, the event is being live streamed on Facebook, which we'll email you all a link to. We've also got some information which are on the tables about the work that we do. And we're using the hashtag Parliament for the People, hashtag Parliament for the Planet this evening. So if you'd like to engage with us at all on Twitter, then use that or use it or directly tweet to us, which is at Hope for the Future, which is just up there. But yeah, I'd like to say on behalf of Hope for the Future, on behalf of all the people in the audience, thank you so much to Paul for chairing the event. Thank you so much to all the other panelists for attending. And just to make a note, we did try to make this event as politically representative as possible, but with commitments that other people have had in the calendars, unfortunately, not everyone has been able to appear. But yeah, I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Paul Tobin, who is a lecturer in politics at the University of Manchester, specialising in European environmental and comparative politics and public policy. His primary focus is on international politics of climate change. So if we can all give Paul and the rest of the panelists a round of applause, that would be great.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be back here again. I'm a graduate of the University of Sheffield, so as soon as I saw the opportunity to come back onto campus and also partake in this very important, timely debate with such important colleagues, I knew I had to say yes straight away. So I think I responded within about 5 minutes of being asked, so it's a real pleasure to be here. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers, so I'm just going to go along and introduce each of them to you now. First of all, on my right, we have Paul Blomfield. He's been the MP for Sheffield Central since 2010, and he's also been the shadow minister for exiting the European Union since October 2016. Then we have Heather Hunt, who joined Extinction Rebellion in January 2019 and was involved in the protests in London in April and October this year. She was one of the many thousands of people to have been arrested as part of those. But she's also been a parliamentary candidate herself and contested the seat against Diane Abbott in 1991. For the Green Party, she was standing. And in 2004, she co-founded the Sheffield campaign against climate change, which is now the Sheffield Climate Alliance. Next, moving along, we have Dr. James Weinberg from the University of Sheffield, who I obviously know through political circles in terms of being academics. It's a pleasure to have him on the panel today. James researches topics such as political citizenship in England, the personalities of political elites, and also politicians' mental health. Then we move on to Musker Sherwood, who is the director of Hope for the Future, whose event we are all here for this evening. Together, campaigners and MPs from across the UK, Sherwood has been working for the past 5 years to research different ways in which we can communicate the urgency of climate change more effectively with UK politicians. And then finally, on the very far left to me this evening, we have Natalie Bennett, who led the Green Party of England and Wales between 2012 and 2016. She has carried on continuing to work full-time in politics, particularly in the North of England and the Midlands. And as of September this year, she has been appointed to the House of Lords and is now the second Green peer. So congratulations to Natalie for that as well. So we have a fantastic panel here, as I'm sure you will agree, and we've received such a lot of questions from you in advance of this evening. We've received over 30 questions, which I'm sure you'd agree is a lot for just over an hour. So we won't possibly begin to try and answer all 30 questions, but what we will do is we'll theme the topics into 4 main broad areas. So the first one is the institution of Parliament and how effective it is. The second one is then climate change as a political issue and the ways it's perhaps being polarised in society. The third thing is how the public can make Parliament act more effectively and tactics for engagement and lobbying. And then finally, the ways in which the UK and people within the UK can encourage us to collectively meet our obligations, for example, the 2030 targets or the Paris climate goals. So that's our 4 sets of broad themes: the institution of Parliament, climate change as a political issue, campaigning, lobbying, and then what we need to do about it in the future. So we've got questions within those. But the key thing is you'll all be very excited to see you've got turning technologies, clickers in your hands. If you've not used these before, they are emerging technology that we often use within lecture theatres when we are teaching. And so it's to this exact results that we'll be turning for our very first question, which is a poll, and we'll ask our panellists to respond to the results of the poll, if it all goes to plan. So we'll see how that all pans out. So the poll, which I'm hoping is, oh, look at that, fantastic. There you go. The poll question is, do you think that Parliament is properly equipped to find solutions to the current climate crisis? So that's our question. A is yes, B is no. If you would mind voting now, Hopefully that should start to make a difference. I feel like we should have a swingometer or something like that going on to follow the field telling. And then we're going to ask, right to left to start us off, standing full, to respond to the results and give a couple of reflections on it. And I'll kind of ask the panel once we've got the results in. Answer? Oh, okay. Oh, I see. So, do the pads have an on button? This is an important question.
Channel?
The general impression I'm getting is that the screen isn't saying yes or no just yet. We can go old school with this. We can go for a good old-fashioned show of hands.
If you press
It isn't doing anything, so we're going to go old school. Thanks for that, but maybe over the course of the evening these will get refined. So that's the same question.
Oh, hang on.
There we go.
Oh.
They're not yours.
Oh. So I did it.
They might be doing it now.
Oh, okay. Let's do it again. Here we go. It'll be worth it. It'll be worth it. So over to you.
It seems to get locked to 30.
Oh, it gets locked at 30. Okay.
Yeah, for some reason. Do you want to do a show of hands or something?
Let's do a show of hands. So, a show of hands, please. You've seen the question a couple of times now, so you're familiar with it. If the answer to the question is yes, please raise your hands. Okay, it's probably a quiz. And if you think the answer is no, please raise your hand. Okay, so that suggests that a majority of people in the room, to my eyes at least, an overwhelming majority, would say that no is the answer to that particular question, which raises interesting questions, I think, about what needs to be changed. It was also worth noting that maybe 25% of you said that yes, the institution is set up as needed. So perhaps that raises some questions about how we need to marshal resources within the institution we have available. So, Paul, if I could turn to you just to reflect on that opening poll. And it may be the case that none of our microphones are on unless the button is raised. So it's not making noise just press once.
Is that working? Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. I think that I can understand that at the moment, believe me, it's as bad inside Parliament as it is outside Parliament. I do understand people's frustration with the institution. But in answering the question, I think that it would be easy to say that Parliament's not equipped, and clearly a number of people feel that. But I'd kind of put the question differently, I think. That there's a lot I'd change in our Parliament. I'd have a proportional representation system. I would devote more power down to communities. But there's no reason why we can't, as it's currently constituted, tackle the climate emergency. The problem is not, in a sense, how we're equipped. It's how we are made up and who the MPs are and what they do. When we were in power, we created a Department for Climate Change. We created a Climate Change Secretary to put climate policy at the very heart of government. We put in place all sorts of measures to improve and drive incentives to encourage renewables, and the current government scrapped it all. So the power is there, the possibilities are there. It's a question of how we take them up.
Thank you, Paul. Heather.
Right. Well, I agree with Paul about needing proportional representation. But I also feel the way Parliament is set in this very adversarial. And we've got to this enormous crisis, ecological and climate crisis. Thank you. And we're needing a way of collaborating to get real solutions to it. So I'll just say what the demands of the Extinction Rebellion are, so that we're very clear. And one is to tell the truth. And that's for Parliament, the MPs and government to tell the truth as it is, which is that the climate scientists say that we are now in unprecedented territory. The climate models no longer predict what's happening. The Hurricane Dorian in the Bahamas is more extreme than anything we've seen two big monsoons happening, or cyclones hitting Mozambique in a month. We know now, and this is way beyond what the IPCC said, that the greenhouse, the Arctic ice is melting at a really, really rapid rate, 5,000 tons a second, and starting positive feedback. So this is a real emergency, let alone the ecological crisis that we're now in 6 mass extinction. This is why we have Extinction Rebellion. And the rebellion is because we consider that the government, and that also includes Parliament, is not taking care of its population. And if it was, there would be ways of really addressing these in a serious way. For example, the Parliament did establish that there was a planned emergency in April. But if there really felt this was an emergency, there would have been something like a war cabinet, cross-party climate cabinet, that would really mobilise the economy, get the message out that we all are going to have to change. What we can do is, and the third demand of Extinction Rebellion, is for citizens' assembly. And that is because the MPs are representing everybody, and they're not doing what needs to be done. Parliament, as you know, has commissioned the citizens' assembly, but it hasn't. Its question is far too late. It's saying, how can we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 2050? It's far too late. So it needs much more teeth.
And we do have a question from you beforehand on the climate changes later on, so we'll definitely come back to that later on. We're going to carry on there and then we've got an opportunity to hit on those points as we go. James, any reflections on that poll we had there?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. First, I'll just say that turn it in technology, not turn it in, whatever this technology is worked out just as well here as it does in my own lectures, so I wasn't surprised. I suppose the first question, talking about Parliament as an institution, whether it's failed, is has it failed and is it failing? And for that, we can look at what might have happened in the last 12 months or so when the climate crisis has really come to the fore of public discourse. Over 12 months ago, the Committee on Climate Change set out 25 headline policy actions that needed to be taken imminently by the UK government. And over 12 months later, only one of those has been acted upon, and that is, which we obviously all welcome, the fact that a target of net zero emissions for greenhouse gases by 2050 has been set in law. 1 out of 25 headline policy actions actually acted upon doesn't seem to me to be a great indicator of parliamentary success. And the government's own projections demonstrate that its policies and plans are also insufficient to meet the 4th or 5th carbon budgets for 2023 to 27 and 28 to 2032. So I was having a little think while Heather and Paul were talking about why this might be, and there's 3 reasons that I can come up with. The first is that our electoral system and our parliamentary system, which is a majoritarian system built on first past the post, you get a certain number of votes, it can be a plurality rather than majority, and you get to govern, actually isn't fit for purpose at the moment. And we can see this on Brexit. The interminable stagnation on other public policy areas during the Brexit period since 2016 has shown that governments can't actually govern with consensus when faced with big crises. And climate emergency is one of those big crises. And there are different opinions on both sides of the House. So whether it's changing electoral incentives so that MPs can think more long-term in terms of public policy on climate change, or whether it's actually changing our electoral system to something like proportional representation, we do need to think about how we change the institution to work for public policy issues like climate change. The second one is that the British parliamentary tradition is just built on incremental change, and that has positives and negatives. Positives are that we don't go through massive thunder shocks or revolutions in our politics, and things progress, hopefully, in one forward direction. But at the same time, the various kind of iterations that legislation has to go through and all the scrutiny, which is very positive in one sense, also means that our ability to respond and react quickly to events is limited. And given the increasingly imminent pressures that we face because of the climate crisis, that also might need to change. And the third is the kind of fragmented way in which policy is made in British politics. If you just look at the issue of responsibilities for climate change across the British civil service, you have the Treasury being told it needs to use its strategic levers such as public spending, taxation to drive the transition to net zero emissions. You've got the Department for Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy told that it needs to focus on carbon capture, the deployment of onshore wind, etc. And then you've got the Departments for Transport and Housing being told that they need to focus on car emissions, carbon emissions, and a road to zero ambition to phase out petrol and diesel cars by 2040, which is actually far too late. And all of these different policies in these different departments are being advanced separately without much coordination. So again, it's this idea of how does Parliament as an institution keep a handle on all of these different activities and coordinate them? And maybe it is, like Heather said, something that demands a kind of climate cabinet in the future.
Okay. Joe.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to just start by saying thank you for coming this evening, because Hope for the Future is born and bred in Sheffield, and now we're a national charity, but it's always a bit risky when you put an event on in your own hometown. You hope people are going to turn up, so thank you. As James really outlined, there are plenty of policy solutions out there, so in a sense, yes, Parliament is equipped, but I think there are three things that we can all do something about that would help Parliament to be much better equipped to respond to climate change. And the first of those is around political will. So because we have such short spans of election cycles, inevitably politicians are focusing on the needs of the electorate here, now, today. And it makes it really difficult to make courageous political decisions. So actually getting out and contacting MPs, lobbying MPs, whether that's through Extinction Rebellion or going to see your MP in surgery or signing petitions or whatever it is, and encouraging everybody else to do the same, is basically the whole premise of what Hope for the Future does. And I think it's so important that politicians know that people are behind them on this. Research is consistently showing that MPs have a certain view of what public perception is on climate change, and actually the public's view on climate change is far further along and far more supportive of radical action. So it's finding ways to demonstrate that. The second thing is our experience. We're in conversation with about 150 different MPs. Our experience is the majority of MPs are still learning about the ins and outs of climate change and climate policy and what it really means. And the amazing thing about our electoral system is that everybody has the right to go and see their MP and give them information and share with them what you know about climate change. And we've seen time and time again that MPs have responded really well to this, to learning about climate change from constituents. So it's equipping MPs with the political will and the knowledge. And the third thing that I wanted to say was around the issue of representation. And we had hoped, we had actually got a more diverse panel this evening, and a couple of people had to drop out, but thinking about the people that are represented in climate change, and again, we hear again and again from MPs saying, you know, what about people that are really marginalised in my constituency? Is climate change the top priority for them? Are you drawing them into these conversations? And actually, only a third of people can name who their MP is, only between 10 and 15% of people actually go and see their MP or contact their MP each year. So there's huge work to be done in actually bringing everybody into the discussion about how we are going to respond to this. And I was thinking we've probably got between 100 and 150 people in the room here tonight. If we were to pool collectively, you know, our sort of 50 closest friends, family, networks, friends of friends, we could probably reach near every constituency in the whole of the UK to have meaningful discussions with our MPs. It can, you know, things can move really quickly if you're beginning to get a core group of people that are really doing things. So those are my thoughts so far.
Okay, well, it's a simple answer to the question. I agree with the majority. Parliament clearly is not properly equipped. And when you look at the fact that the last significant change in Westminster was women getting the vote, and that was 100 years ago, that's not really surprising that Parliament isn't ready. And, you know, as you might say, the whole of Parliament not being equipped, well, the House of Lords has its own peculiarities. Having been there a month, the first week I went and did a tour of the library, and there's a big brass bell on the wall that says, "For the refreshment service only." And I said to the young man showing me round, "What's that?" He looked a bit embarrassed and said, "That's the sherry bell." And then he added hastily, "Oh, but it's never worked in my time here." And the idea that we should move Parliament out of Westminster and put it in Birmingham or even Sheffield in a new modern building would be a nice idea. And to get it, as Heather and others and Paul said, proportional representation, let's make Britain a democracy would be a really good thing to do. And the other thing that's really noticeable when you're speaking in the House of Lords, and indeed if you watch the Commons sessions, is the number of MPs who, before they make a contribution, have to declare their financial interests. And the numbers who have financial interests in fossil fuel companies, in mining companies. One of the other reasons why Parliament is not currently equipped is it simply doesn't have the right people in it. We have to stop electing the wrong people and hoping, lobbying them to do the right thing. Much as I agree with it, it's worth the effort, but let's change who we elect to Parliament, the system and the people. However, I want to focus on one thing. Yesterday I was at the Rand Centre here, also at the university, speaking to students there. And some people were saying, "Oh, well, democracy just can't work quick enough. We'll have to have some sort of, dictatorship or something." And so I want to say, I want to be with the people here who put their hand up and say Parliament is equipped, or they'd like to think it's equipped, because the answer has to be democracy. What we need is more democracy, not less. And if you look at the countries in the world that are broadly doing the best things, who've got the kind of policies we can copy, they're broader than the Scandinavians, which are the world's most democratic countries.
Okay, so thank you so much, Natalie. Let's continue with that vein in mind. We've had our opening remarks from our panels, particularly regarding the institutions of Parliament. We're going to start off with James Brown and head linewards from there. And that's why has climate change not been a legislative priority in Parliament? Why have there been so few debates on that topic? And what are the main obstacles, beyond this institution, but the main obstacles that prevent climate change being a major issue within Parliament? So, that's good decisions there about the institution of Parliament itself, but 40-second response on what are the obstacles to climate change being a legislative priority? And it's the same questions we had backwards, and then continuing after Paul, onto Natalie and James.
Just a small question then, Paul.
Just a tiny one.
Yeah.
Go.
Okay. Well, I'm going to focus just on the people in Parliament then. I have to say that I disagree with Natalie. I don't think it's helpful to try and perpetuate stereotypes about politicians. I've just finished doing research with over 500 councillors and MPs who took personality studies, surveys. I did interviews, talked to them about their priorities. Actually, on climate change, they're much more ahead of the curve than the general public that a few thousand members of the general public that I used in the study as well. In terms of why legislation on climate change might not be progressing, there's a kind of psychology of this that we can delve into. Politicians on the left, their personalities are much more suited to talking and considering climate change than those on the right, but let me caveat that. So the personalities of politicians in parties on the left tended to lean towards an openness towards change, a stronger desire to think about the welfare of others and kind of caring for the environment around them. And those personality characteristics positively predicted very liberal and advanced views on and almost radical views on what we could do in terms of climate change. On the right, the personalities of politicians and voters are much more oriented towards conservation values, so traditions, religion, kind of maintaining harmonious relationships with others. And that doesn't lend itself easily to radical or advanced opinions on climate change, because climate change poses a threat to the status quo. So it could be about how we frame climate change as an issue for both politicians and voters.
Thank you, James.
Yes, well, I'm going to take up this idea of threat. I think there are very much vested interests here in maintaining the business as usual, We know the masses of money that was put in by Exxon about climate deniers, which has really skewed the debate for a long, long time. And I'm going to tackle head-on this idea of industrial growth. If we're really going to decarbonise and a just transition, we need to stop having economic growth. And I find the work of Tim Jackson really useful, the economist who talks about prosperity without growth. And that's redefining prosperity in terms of well-being and satisfying life. And a way of having an economy that works for the well-being of all and within political limits. It does mean stopping that search for profits. And it's what Tim Jackson, he calls it the age of irresponsibility that we're in, where this economic growth model needs it's extractivist, and that's all over the world, and exploitative. It isn't working for the majority of people. And it's kind of head-on, really, having to reframe, talk about framing, psychologies, and about this is the old story, the industrial growth, and we need a new story. And I do think the civil disobedience movement of youth, the Extinction Rebellion, is part of this new story. And it's pushing it, and it's also one about being interconnected, and being interconnected with nature and with each other, and for the rest of the world. And that's our new story, and one I think that we really need to take forward, redefining what prosperity is.
Well, I was elected as somebody 9 years ago who was keen to press on the climate crisis, and was, as Joe and I think a few other people in the room know, disappointed that I was never lobbied much as an MP on climate issues. And that has thankfully changed. So, going to your question of how do we get the momentum to achieve real change, the sort of radical change we need, it is about that wider political will. And that changed, extraordinarily with Greta Thunberg. A friend of mine is a Swedish member of parliament, and she sent me recently, she sat down with Greta every Friday when she was sitting on the steps of the Swedish parliament and talked to her about her notice of being there. But the way in which that movement inspired young people throughout the world to take action in the way that they have has had a real impact on our politics, because over the last year, lots of people now are lobbying me. And if they're lobbying me, somebody who had an appetite for it, they're also lobbying other MPs who didn't. And that's creating the possibility for real change. And Joe talked about political will. We need to recognise that political will isn't just from politicians. Political will is everybody who's involved in politics. Everybody who's involved in politics are the 65 million people in our country. And so, those of us who are elected need to provide some leadership, but unless there is consent, you won't get action. As was demonstrated in France when President Macron imposed green taxes for the very best reasons in the world. And it led to that uprising of the Yellow Vest movement, resisting green taxes. So we have to get a movement where politics and politicians and those who elect them are working in tandem. And I just briefly would say that you won't get that if you start arguing for negative growth. Because what negative growth means is people getting poorer. And it's not just in this country. Take China. People talk about China as a big polluter. And certainly emissions have grown hugely in China over the last period. But in recent years, China has also taken more people out of poverty in a shorter period of time than any other country in the history of the world. And their emissions now are still per capita pretty similar to ours, actually. So I think we've got to not talk about being against economic growth, but reframing growth to talk about sustainable growth so that people can both have the quality of life that they want and the funding that we need to run our NHS and our universities and our schools and our public services, but to do it in a way which doesn't destroy the planet.
Thank you, Paul. Over to you, Natalie.
Well, I'm going to have to entirely philosophically disagree with what Paul just said there. He said negative growth means getting poorer. Well, in the UK, we're collectively, however you live as an individual, using the resources, our share of the resources of 3 planets every year. We have to go back to one planet living. That isn't politics, that's physics. Now, the basic difference here, and I think Heather is right in that why Parliament struggled is because business as usual is not an option. When Parliament does debate climate change, the climate emergency, it's very often talking about, oh, let's electrify cars or something. Business as usual with a bit of added technology. And actually, climate change means tackling the desperate inequality in our society and in the world. The pie cannot get any bigger. We have to share the pie out far more fairly. That means a radical redistribution. You can't say to the whole of Britain, right, everyone cut back by 2/3. We're going from 3 pies to 1 way, pie, everyone cut back by 2/3. That literally means a lot of people dead. That means the rich, the people who are consuming large amounts of resources, have to consume an awful lot less. And some people have to be lifted up to give access to more resources. So we have to stop GDP growth. We can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. We have to have massive redistribution. And what we all get out of that, why policies like the universal basic income is a crucial policy for tackling the climate emergency, is if you give people in exchange for that security, so no one fears not being able to put food on the table, keep a roof over their head. And that's the trade-off for some people not being able to run away and consume what they like. And also, if they're paying their taxes, then we also get to fund the schools and hospitals and everything else. So it's a win-win all round.
So I just wanted to pick up on what Paul said about representation. I think there's a difference between being a representative and being a delegate. And I think, that yes, there needs to be that sense in which, as I already kind of passionately put forward the case, that politicians need to feel that they have the support of people behind them. But there is also that case for politicians to show leadership on something, and that can drive real cultural change as well. If you look at drink driving, for example, and when that was brought in just a generation ago, a couple of generations ago, it's normal to take a drink and go driving, whereas now in our generation wouldn't think of doing that, and that primarily came from legislative change. And so there's, it is coming from both sides. And the other thing, sort of going back to the original question about why it is that politicians aren't acting on it, and I was thinking about in America and how there's so much party divide on climate change and how damaging that has been, and just encouraging really the panel and all politicians to move away from things that make this a partisan issue, because it is only through, as Helen said, making this a cross-party issue that we're going to get anywhere on this, and that's my firm belief, and that's the experience that we have had talking to politicians over the last sort of few years, is that it is that cross-party work that is going to span election cycles and span all the different varying stories that are going on in politics at the moment from all the different varying parties.
And thank you, Joe. That ties very nicely to the next question that's been submitted by Eventbrite about types of ways of encouraging people to lobby their churches. What you're making about representation. So I was wondering if I could go straight back to you, Joe, if that's okay, about pledges. I know, honestly. So about pledges as a technique for lobbying politics. To what extent do you think there's value in candidates submitting pledges prior to elections? And if you could then go back to Natalie and Mary from there.
Just to clarify, do you mean politicians submitting pledges?
Oh, sorry, I think the phrasing of the question, so for example, was the Green Alliance's Charter for the Environment still worth promoting? So I think this is more in line with social movements and citizens asking their politicians to sign a pledge in advance of the next election in order to then pursue certain policies once elected.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, so There's some research from Rebecca Willis that I'd really commend to you from a couple of years ago. So it'll be slightly outdated now, but it shows that for a lot of politicians, talking about climate change in Parliament is still seen as a career-limiting move, unbelievably. And this is what her research showed. It's Rebecca Willis. And so anything really that gets politicians normalising talking about climate change, I think is a really important and really significant thing. So I think there's value certainly in that. I'd want to kind of caution against kind of petitions. Just a note around petitions is that we also hear a lot of feedback from MPs, I'm sure we'll back up on this, where politicians will receive, "Dear, insert the name of your MP here." I'm very upset about blah, blah, blah. And I think sometimes that can be a substitution for real political engagement. It's actually taking the time to write a personal handwritten letter. Then yes, include the particular bit of legislation, policy, pledge, whatever it is that you want your MP to sign up to, and then why you're interested in this and your personal story with it as well. I think can be really powerful.
Brilliant, thank you. Rebecca Willis is based at Lancaster University in case you're research. Natalie, over to you about pledges.
Well, I just wanted to come back very quickly on what Joe said about not being a partisan issue. I understand why you feel the need, you think it's valuable, and I agree it's valuable to lobby people from all sides. But if you follow on from what I said previously, it's impossible to be a Green and a right-winger. It's impossible to be philosophically coherent, because there has to be a radical redistribution of resources in society away from the rich, which puts you on the left of politics. I feel quite comfortable saying that in Sheffield, really, because I think there's too many people in the room who disagree with it, but I'll also say it in Surrey and debate it there. But in terms of the question on pledges, I would also say it's worthwhile, should there be anyone here who are fortunate enough to be from somewhere other than Sheffield who does have a right-wing MP, by all means, try and get them to sign a pledge. It's worth doing, it's worth being able to hold them account, it's worth being able to challenge them. But what I'd say, this is what I'd say in response, is something that needs to be done much more. When you write a letter to your MP on any subject, or you get them to sign a pledge and they don't live up to it, write a letter to the paper, post on Facebook, tell people about the fact that you haven't had an adequate response from your representative. It's something that I think people don't do enough. People come up to me and say, "I'm really angry, I wrote to my MP and I got this totally inadequate response." And my answer is share that with the local paper or share that on Facebook and tell lots of other people, because that's the way you spread the word around. So pledges are useful, but just use them as a weapon. And because I'm a Green, I'll say this, in a non-violent way, use it as a club to beat your MP.
Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, I think pledges are useful, particularly around election time. You've kind of got your mind on how people might see the way that you respond on issues. But they have a limit. I agree with Joe that personal contact's the most important thing, the most powerful thing. And everybody can see the Member of Parliament. We all have surgeries, we all have an opportunity to meet. Actually, if you go along and see your MP and eyeball them and see the commitment out of them, it's much harder to dodge that than it is a campaign email or a pledge. And then I'd agree with Joe as well about campaign emails. It is, I get lots of campaign emails. I would encourage you to write. It is really useful because it's a bit of a barometer about how people are feeling about things. But it's a bit irritating sometimes when people have pressed a button on a campaign site, and I give them a long and detailed reply. It's happened more than once. People said, "What are you writing to me for? I've never contacted you." And I'm also sometimes a bit frustrated that sometimes people see pressing a button on a campaign as the limitation of their involvement. So I try always to throw a challenge back to people and say, "Well, I'm glad you asked me this, and this is what I'm doing, and this is what you could do." And in relation to climate change, I always point people to joining Sheffield Climate Alliance. And I don't know how many people do. I mean, I'm hoping more recently that your membership will have been boosted because more people are writing to me and I'm challenging them to get involved. But I also agree with Joan, I'm sorry, disagreeing with Natalie. I think it's hugely important if we are to make progress around the world that we don't simply give up on politicians who aren't of the left. Now, for those of us who are on the left, I mean, this is kind of more natural territory. But the truth is, around the world, there are governments of the centre-right, and we want governments around the world to act. And if we make climate change a policy which is a defining issue between right and left, then we will limit the ability to achieve the sort of change we want. Now, as on the left, we have a different approach to climate change because it is wrapped with social justice in the way that Natalie, I do agree with Natalie on. But if we simply say write off conservative politicians, don't bother contacting them because because they don't share our perspective, then you will hold back the climate movement and you will prevent the sort of action that we need.
I'm going to come in from the Italian perspective, and our second demand is act now, and that's what we have to do. And things like no airport expansion, no more roads, no more investing in exploration of fossil fuels. The time has gone for pledges, the time is for legislation. I wonder if there is a pledge, the bill that I found really useful first reading, decarbonisation and economic strategy bill, put forward by Caroline Lucas, and seconded by Clive Lewis. So that was across party. And that is a 10-year time frame for decarbonisation and equality and addressing the habitat destruction. A pledge that would say, can we reintroduce this bill, and vote for this bill would be the kind of pledge that to me makes sense, or to Extinction Rebellion would make sense. That would what now we look like.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And we're now going to move on to another question about.
Oh, sorry, James. I don't know.
Honestly, I'm not quite ready for.
I was loving all the answers as well, Paul.
Exactly.
No, don't worry. So the only thing I would say on pledges is that I don't think they're particularly useful at an individual level. I think when you make an individual politician cast a pledge on one issue, it actually reduces their substantive engagement with that issue, because all they start to think about is the electoral pressure of what if I don't fulfill on this. So at an individual level, I'm not sure they're particularly useful. They cut corners. They'll try and find ways to say that they've done something simply because of the way the electoral system, the pressure that comes with it, is designed. The second thing is that you make politicians pledge something that might happen in the distant future, or even the near or medium future, and you create an expectations gap, because that then gets publicised, and the general public thinks, oh, well, politicians can achieve that, and actually politics is messy, and it's full of contingencies, and Parliament doesn't work that well or that quickly enough for all these pledges to be fulfilled. And then when that politician doesn't fulfill on something that might actually have been out of their control in the first place, we become more cynical, the general public stereotypes politicians more, and our general belief and trust in the political system dissipates. And we need the reverse if we're going to work together to tackle climate change. The other thing is, and I agree with Paul on this, is that when we say we need politicians to make pledges, well, there's only 650 of them. And yes, they have enormous power as a legislative body to regulate and incentivize the rest of the country to get on board with climate change. But it also allows the public to take the pressure off themselves. If they think the politicians are getting on with handling climate change, then the public feels less inclined to be acting themselves. And it's also about pressure as well. I know Natalie said we should ignore some people in this debate, and others have said, well, we have to be putting on as much pressure as possible. The average politician works over 70 hours a week. They have 10,000 plus pieces of correspondence every single week. And the majority of the 500 that I've spoken to and done research with in the last year have talked about having experienced symptoms of depression, stress, and feeling utterly overwhelmed by the weight of public expectation and the kind of the anger and vitriol that they receive about things that they can't individually change. So we have to have realistic expectations, we have to work with them. And in terms of ignoring people on the right, I think we're probably all here at this event, or lots of us will be, because we might sit more on the political left, and that's fine. But we've seen with big policy eruptions like Brexit and ancillary issues to do with immigration and other topics, that when you try and shut down the debate in one part of the electorate, or you tell those people you make them feel uncomfortable about expressing a view, you don't bring them with you. And then you might make 2 steps forward in democratic terms, but then what you've left is this pressure cooker that erupts, and we take another step backwards. So I think we should be, especially in this time of division, thinking about healing and unifying ways of getting everyone from all political domains on board with tackling climate change.
Okay, thank you, James. So we have a point here where we are going to come to the poll, and I'm guessing that poll software isn't quite ready.
What question?
Yes, so there's a third question, if that's okay, which is regarding whether you personally have undertaken any of the following to encourage greater political action on climate change. So there are 4 options: net zero, taking part in a strike for the climate, both and neither. So it's just a good way of getting a feel for the room how much people have necessarily engaged with the discussions themselves. So, first things first, in answer to the question, who would be happy to put their hand up for response A, please? And response B? And response C, which is both. And then response C, which is neither. Right, okay. So I'm going to ask the panelists to reflect on that point. We go back there, but also starting off with Heather. You mentioned earlier on the idea of citizens' assemblies. So this is a democratic innovation, the idea that a select number of people from across society are selected to be part of the citizens' assembly to child successfully in Ireland over several very political issues over there. If we could start with Heather to reflect on the poll we've just had, and also the utility of citizens' assemblies. So we'll carry on down to Paul and then across onto Natalie.
Well, you said they were used very successfully in Ireland on contentious issues. And that's where you have people that are representing the whole walks of life coming together. And they are informed, have expert information. For example, like for climate change, have expert information on different pathways of how greenhouse gases can be reduced. And because people are coming from different walks of life, economic background, ages, geography, they think and discuss how that impacts on all of those communities. And it's a way of, unlike adversarial politics, really working it out and then coming up with recommendations from everybody on what would work best in the interests of everybody. I think and there's been one now run for Oxford, and there's a jury being run in Leeds, which is a smaller, 20 people rather than 50 or 100, not to. I think some key things are to frame the question right, and one thing is to have a whole body of stakeholders that decide on the question. And then the stakeholders, be they the universities, the council, business, trade unions, they're then brought in to when the recommendations come to implement them. Otherwise, it becomes a bit of a talking shop with, okay. So that seems to be the key thing. And the one that the parliamentary committee set up, I'm not sure in what way the parliament's been tied into any implementation. And as we said, their question is how can Britain reduce its greenhouse gases by 2050, which is far too late. How many parliaments will have been next before that? So to have teeth, a citizen assembly with teeth, a stakeholder panel decide on the question, and that the stakeholders themselves will agree to be strongly guided by that. But it's quite new still in Britain.
Oh. The polling and also citizens assemblies.
Well, on the citizens' assemblies, I agree. I should have said. I mean, I think there's some interesting examples not only in Ireland but also in Canada, where they use citizens' assemblies to achieve democratic constitutional change and build consensus around them. I think the French citizens' assembly at the moment is beginning to look at the issue of the climate emergency. It's quite a good model. The constitution of it is enormously diverse. I mean, it's got members of the Yellow Vest movement in France, so it's got the kind of depth in terms of those who are excluded from society, but also of right and left, trying to address the question, and I think that can be hugely powerful. It does, I think Anna makes a good point about the connection between the stakeholders who constitute it and the assembly, so there's some level of engagement which will lead to action, because otherwise there's a danger that it kind of cuts adrift and it feels as, you know, it comes up with a great set of recommendations and feels as remote from most people's lives as Parliament feels from most people's lives. On that last point, I simply say, if you haven't, you're MP, you want it.
Thank you. Natalie?
I just want to clarify the previous discussion. I didn't say don't lobby the right-wing person. I said lobby them until you can get rid of them. That's the answer. Because the nature of politics is such that there's something called an Overton window, what's seen as mainstream politics. And that shifted from Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan onward, shifted enormously to the right. And what we can do is shift it back in our direction towards social justice and equality. And that's the matter of changing things that we have to do for the climate emergency. But in terms of the people acting, what's crucial here, and I don't want to criticise anyone who hasn't done any of these things, because what people feel overwhelmingly in our society now is a sense of powerlessness. And that's what people are taught right from schools. Schools have been forced to become exam factories where people are shoved through exam after exam after exam. And extracurricular activities, like getting involved in politics, is certainly not encouraged. And I've got a saying that politics should be what you do, not have done to you. And I try and go into schools, colleges and universities whenever I can and spread that message. And you know what I say is you can start here in this school, college or university, look at something you really don't like and start a campaign to change it. At which point the person who invited me in kind of puts their head down and goes, what have I done? But we need to actually get people feeling like they can take control of our lives. And this is how we particularly take on the far right, because people who feel utterly powerless, they look to the person riding up on the white horse to rescue them. They look to the person who says, well, we save things for us and ours and shove those other people away. If people feel empowered, like they can act, like they can take control, that's absolutely crucial, and that's why I said at the start that democracy is crucial to tackling the climate emergency.
Okay.
So I think the thing that most kind of keeps me awake at night about climate change is that the window of opportunity for transitioning to a low carbon economy in a way that brings everybody along with us and doesn't create a whole load of other social problems that we will be kind of having to manage, even if we do manage to hold climate change to a reasonable level, if that window of opportunity is closing. And so I think that's why the issue of representation is so important. That's why citizen assemblies are so brilliant, because they can involve everybody, and they can show a rigorous system with which information is gathered, verified, shared, decided upon, as opposed to kind of claims like right and centre being thrown around, as we're seeing at the moment. But with the caveat that by the time someone's been through the process of the citizens' assembly, they come out of it in quite a different position to the everyday person who hasn't been through the various cycles of information and hearing this and debating and focusing on it a great deal. So it has its limitations in that sense. It's still part of the institution.
I'm going to pick up on something Natalie said and agree with her that there's an educational dimension to this debate in terms of getting people participating in politics, and it's an educational dimension that is paralleled with the kind of format of citizens' assemblies. we have lots of academic evidence to show that if you receive good political education in terms of active citizenship as well as adaptive forms of learning, then you will feel far more politically efficacious when you're older, more likely to get involved with politics, contact a politician, organise a campaign, whatever it might be. You're going to know much more about politics and how to exercise your democratic rights, and you're going to be far more likely to vote as well as get involved in other expressive, informal types of politics. But what we don't have at the moment is a fit-for-purpose scheme of political education for maintained schools in this country. I was a secondary school teacher before I moved into academia, and I had to teach politics to my students in my own time as an extracurricular activity that wasn't or couldn't be supported by the school because we didn't have enough funding. Citizenship education, which was first introduced in 2002, is the only statutory form of political education for young people in this country, and yet initial teacher training is incredibly sparse. Last year, fewer than 50 teachers trained in citizenship education. It would take us another 3 decades at that rate to place 1 trained citizenship teacher in every single maintained school in this country. Only 2/3 of maintained schools actually deliver citizenship education because of a lack of expertise or a lack of time in the curriculum, and it's no longer, or from 2013 onwards, no longer assessed by Ofsted, so there's no incentive framework for SLTs to teach it either. The A level has also been cut, and endowment funding for extracurricular activities in main schools in terms of active citizenship has been cut by 75%. So when it comes to getting people, not just in this room, but future generations of young people involved in politics, we don't yet have an education system designed for that, and that is something that needs to change very quickly.
So our next question from Ben Price from York. We're going to start off with Natalie first. And that question is all about climate change as a political issue, and move on to Joe after Natalie. The question is, how can we make the climate crisis of the utmost importance in an environment dictated by Brexit? So how can we make the climate crisis of the utmost importance in an environment dictated by Brexit?
In short, the simple way to ensure that the climate emergency gets attention that it needs and we can focus on it is we have to stop Brexit. That is the simple answer. And I say that because if we do actually leave the EU, that is like, I saw a really good parallel, this was described as a metaphor for this. Leaving the EU, the withdrawal agreement, is like when the couple have sat down and they've decided they are going to divorce. What we will have to spend, if we do leave, spend the next 5 to 6 years at the most absolute optimistic, 10 years far more likely, is for that couple deciding how to divide up family assets and decide the custody of the children. So if we do Brexit, we're going to spend a huge amount of time, the vast amount of political time, political capital, political energy will be spent on trying to establish what our relationship is with the rest of the world, with our neighbours, with the EU, talking about trade agreements. And we just don't have time to do that. We don't have the energy, we don't have the space. So that's what we have to do.
Yeah, I suppose the counter I've made to that is if you stop Brexit, you don't actually stop all the discussion and the disquiet and all of the energy that's being poured into this crisis of who is heard, who is represented, who is unhappy about the way decisions are being made. So you can't just say, let's stop Brexit and then we can put our energy towards climate change, in my opinion. So we're in a fortunate position that the whole world doesn't resolve around the UK. So if we're busying ourselves on Brexit, fortunately, there are lots of other countries doing lots of really good things on climate change. And just getting on with it once we get left behind. That being said, we have net zero. We were the first major economy in the world to commit to net zero under a Tory government. That is a commitment that I think the majority of MPs don't actually, and this excludes you, I'm sure, but the majority of MPs don't actually know what that means, what that's going to look like for legislation and policy, and how we're actually going to meet this time. But we do have this framework, this existing framework that we didn't have a year ago. That is one of the most ambitious in the world, the most ambitious in the world, that we can work to and be quietly trying to hold politicians accountable to whilst all of this Brexit stuff is going on. So, in a sense, I've dodged the question because I think it's really difficult to put climate change to the top of the political agenda when we've got Brexit going on. But fortunately, it's not all down to us, and also we do have a legislative framework to work on.
Thank you, Paul. I don't think this is about stopping Brexit, but just getting it out of public discourse and whatever happens moving on. I mean, I personally want to remain in the European Union. I campaigned to remain in 2016, but I also recognise that we may do more damage to society and social cohesion by cancelling or revoking Article 50 than having a final say between a credible withdrawal agreement and remain. And I think doing that as quickly as possible, getting past that, allowing the civil service to get on with whatever, if we do leave, whatever the next 2 years of trade negotiations are going to happen in the background, and changing public discourse back to focus on other public policy issues like climate change is possible. So I think Brexit can happen and we can still get on with tackling the climate crisis. And I think for this, we should look forward to next year when the UK is going to co-host the UN Climate Summit in late 2020 with Italy. Now that's a world event, and that's a chance for the UK to take a kind of leadership position on climate change beyond its, first in the world to commit to net zero emissions by 2050. So let's not get hung up on Brexit being the be-all and end-all of everything to do with politics. Let's find a way to get past it while still healing social divisions, and let's get other things like climate change back on the public agenda.
I just wonder if quite a few people are very tired of Brexit, hearing about it, and more people are getting more concerned around environmental issues and climate, particularly young people. So I suppose the idea about is keeping on with this sort of keeping on that conversation, keep telling the truth and what needs to happen. And just really commending the green movements that have come together and campaign to get televised debate between leaders on climate change is going to go ahead on November 19th. So these are ways that are upping the climate agenda before the election.
Well, I think climate change trumps everything in terms of importance, but inevitably our politics is going to be dominated by other issues, and there's a very clear relationship between Brexit and the sort of policies that we want. I'm tired of talking about Brexit. There is not a single day, I think, in the last 4 years, including Christmas time, that I haven't talked about Brexit, both because I led a really strong campaign here in Sheffield Central to remain in the European Union, and 70% of constituents here in our patch did vote to remain. I think now that we need a further referendum in which I'll campaign to remain again. And I think a lot of people in this room will have an opportunity to vote for the first time, and that's, I think, would be a big step forward. But we need to remember why those who led the Leave campaign did so. It was in their own words because they wanted a bonfire of regulations. They wanted to break the UK's alignment with the European social model and the protections that it provides for workers, for consumers, and for the environment. So it's critically important that we make that case and push whatever happens. If we get the referendum, if we reverse the decision, then that's clearly secures the alignment. But we need to be pushing consistently, if we don't, for that to maintain the alignment. We've tried as a shadow Brexit team to embed a requirement for dynamic alignment with the European Union in the withdrawal agreements that have been put forward by the Conservatives, and we failed to do that because they want to diverge. The new European Commission, and if we were a member, we would be very much part of it, have committed to work with the European Parliament for a new EU Green Deal, which is a very ambitious programme to set a climate law across the continent, to establish a just transition fund, to have a European climate pact, to develop a really tangible adaptation strategy. Now we should, whatever happens, be pressing for UK alignment with that ambition. So, although climate change trumps everything, in order to achieve what we want to tackle the climate emergency, we're going to have to engage in all of those issues as well.
Thank you, Paul. If you are interested in the academic research behind Brexit and the environment, there's a project that has absolutely nothing to do with me, I'm not advertising here. Co-led by Charlotte Burns from the University of Sheffield, Andy Jordan from the University of East Anglia, and Lillian Bradley, Community University of Belfast, called Brexit and Environment. So there is research being done on that if you want to read up some more. So Brexit and Environment, Charlotte Burns, University of Sheffield, et al. So I'd like to build on a couple of other points that we've just been hearing about in terms of urbanisation, social movement for young people and education, into one question that was pitched forward from Hope for the Future. James, I'm going to start off with you. How can we engage more people in the climate movement, but particularly young people as well? And we're open for people to interpret the climate movement however you wish to do so. So James, starting off with you and then moving over to Heather. How can we encourage more people, particularly young people, to get involved in the climate movement?
Well, probably because I'm the least qualified to answer this question now, so I won't take too long. The simple answer for me is that it has to become a more prominent feature of education. I don't know about when you were at school, but the only time we mentioned climate change was in the odd geography lesson when we studied the structure of a glacier and everyone fell asleep. It needs to become much more front and centre, and we need to be, in the same way that we do with a few other major topics like teaching controversial issues, make it a cross-curricular topic, embedded in initial teacher training programs for all teaching staff, and make sure that our young people, who unfortunately are going to be the generations that deal with the consequences of climate change, but also take on the challenges of addressing it, know what's to come and are ready to build those solutions.
I think from our point of view, we're really encouraged by Youth for the Climate, the strike that's really been taking off all over the world. And certainly in Sheffield, it's really growing. So it may not have come from lessons in school, but it's come from social media or other places. Greta Thunberg has been an amazing influence on that. And young people are feeling that we meet, are feeling really empowered by coming out and taking action, doing something. And it's interesting how the schools differ in their responses, and some are shifting towards, well, the parents get permission, and doing stuff in schools based on what the young people, because they're going on strike, where I'm just involved in a small woodcraft group, and they went out from school, and the teacher said, primary age, okay, you can go if you do a presentation to the whole school. So we're on this drama. So that's brilliant, isn't it? So the head teachers really engage with that. So the young people are influenced in school. I just think it's growing that really, and educating themselves and being educated in what it means for them.
Thank you. Paul?
Yes, I'd echo those points. I think that, in a sense, the focus is wrong to talk about why more young people and young people have demonstrated to the rest of us just how important the issue is. And when I do each year when Parliament's in ordinary recess, we have an extraordinary recess this year, I do a big community consultation, about 40 different events over about 3 weeks, and a survey alongside it. And I do events in every one of the secondary schools in the constituency with a whole year group. And it was very striking this year how much more engaged young people were with the issue of climate crisis than they were just 12 months ago in the surveys and in the conversations that I had. So I think that that embedding and teaching about the crisis within schools is important. Let's build from the lesson that young people are giving us in terms of engaging other people. I think the way of engaging other people is to not somehow see the climate crisis as separate from their daily lives, or the policies that we need to respond to it as separate from their daily lives. So if we kind of develop a narrative which is there is this climate emergency, which clearly there is, and the only way that you can tackle it is by stopping doing things you like doing, or by being poorer, then we lose. We just lose the argument. If we develop policies which are win-wins, so for example, the massive program of retro-insulating people's houses, which could be huge, will have a huge impact on reducing carbon emissions, but will also reduce family fuel bills. So we're going to develop the sort of policies that make sense in every way.
Well, I entirely agree with what Paul just said, and I think this is how we can actually get the bridge over through giving people the final say, winning that remaining, but also saying we have to tackle the problems that we've got now, the reasons we have to acknowledge why people voted leave, and that's because society is not working for them. And I debated an economist from BP last week, and the question we were asked to confront was, can we live without fossil fuels? And I said, let's turn this around and say, isn't it great we don't have to rely on these filthy, undemocratic, destructive fossil fuels? We can build a different kind of society, isn't that wonderful? And that's the story we need to be out telling. I mean, as Paul said, warm, comfortable, affordable heat homes for everybody. In Sheffield, we have a huge problem with air pollution. Yesterday, with the Grantham Centre, we were talking about the problems of the huge numbers of children who start school who are already overweight or obese, and the even higher percentages of children who leave school overweight and obese. The kind of changes that we need to make in terms of encouraging walking and cycling, but also changing our diet. At the moment, we have a food strategy. It's not written down. The food strategy is let's let the supermarkets and multinational companies decide what we eat. And that's trashing the planet and giving us a terrible diet. Let's turn that around, and the kind of changes like restoring the ring of market gardens around Sheffield, growing lots of food locally, healthy fruit and vegetables, local food, small business opportunities. All of these are things that are tackling the climate emergency. They're also building a much better society. So we have to paint that picture and not say, isn't it terrible we've got to tackle the climate emergency? Say, isn't it great we've got a chance to build a much better society?
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on what you said about kind of importance of positive framing. We're a charity, so we spend a little bit of time thinking about fundraising, and what we've learned is that when people use a fear message around fundraising, people tend to give quite a lot of money. When you use a hopeful message, people tend not to give quite so much money up front. But over time, if you use a fear message, people will give money in order to disengage. They'll see something really sad or really terrible or really hard, and they will give their money in order to feel, right, I've dealt with that. Whereas if you use a hope message, people tend to continue to engage with something over a long period of time. And I think, what people do with their money tells you a lot about how people are motivated. So, yes, we need a fear message because we need to have that impact. We need to have that rapid response right now, grabbing people's attention. But we do need that hope message that enables people to remain engaged over a long period of time and avoid the kind of burnout. And it rises on the political agenda and then it goes back down again, rises again, goes again. The other thing I was going to say is on the issue of young people who are absolutely leading the climate movement at the moment is that I think Robbie runs school workshops all around the UK as part of our work, and the students present their climate campaigns to the MPs, and I'm sorry, but they know a lot more than the MPs quite a lot of the time. It's absolutely extraordinary how much young people are just literate around this stuff in a way that I don't feel I was anywhere close to that when I was their age. You know, they know more than me sometimes. And another kind of, I suppose, is when the school strikes first started, and different politicians had different reactions, and some politicians saying, you know, this is truancy or whatever. In the Conservative Party, very quickly, they realised the power and the impact of that, and they mandated a 3-line whip that all politicians, all of their politicians, all Conservative MPs should engage with any young person wanting to talk to them about climate change. And that was quite a big shift from where they had been just a few months before that. And that's the kind of impact that the school strikes had in a matter of kind of weeks that meant that, you know, now every Conservative MP has to go and meet with a young person who wants to talk to them about climate change.
Thank you, Jane. So our final question then, which gives an opportunity to our presenters to draw from all the things we've been hearing about this evening, is one looking to the future, short-term future in many ways, which is what is the number one priority that we as a society now need? What's the number one step rather than priorities? I think we've discussed priorities this evening, maybe climate change and other stuff. So what's the number one step we now need to take as a society in order to respond to the climate challenge? So if I could start off with Natalie, what is the number one step? We've heard a lot about growth this evening, parliaments, its structures, institutions, parties, social movements. If you could summarise your main arguments for the next steps in around 90 seconds each.
Okay. I'll finish where I started, which is democracy. What's absolutely crucial is this is something we have to take everyone along with us. And I think I will reflect on the power that the young people, the climate strikers, are showing. And I'm going to actually, one of the things I seek to do is to amplify their messages and share their messages. When I go to the climate strike, I get lots of photos of placards and just put them out on social media because I want to make sure they've got a voice, giving people feeling empowered, having a voice. So I'm going to finish with a 14-year-old from a couple of climate strikes back here in Sheffield, who said, got up in front of the town hall steps and about 600 people with a microphone, with utter self-possession, said, well, my history teachers asked me this morning, shouldn't I be spending my time revising for the history exam rather than going on a climate strike? And I said to my history teacher, well, no, because I want a future. And that is just the most perfect, wonderful message delivered by a 14-year-old to a huge crowd. So I feel hugely optimistic because we are coming through a wonderful generation of activists and active people, and we need to bring them together with all the other generations and collectively demand the change that will make our lives better and ensure that we do our future.
I agree with that. And I mean, I think that let's have a note of optimism. I mean, our politics is quite depressing at the moment and quite difficult. But a note of optimism is to be inspired by young people to put this issue at the heart of our agenda. And I guess what is the most important thing that we could do now? Let's use the we as the audience and everybody who's taken time to come along tonight. And it's brilliant to see so many people on a wet Friday night engaged in this issue. We've actually got something coming up on the 12th of December, which I'm involved in, which Alison is involved in as a Green Party candidate. I think that if here and across the country, and students are in a particularly good position because you are constituents, in many cases, in both places, and in some cases not with sympathetic politicians. Let's make the climate emergency the central issue of this election.
Well, following that, I felt more hopeful this last year, and that's been part of the enormous movement. It's Extinction Rebellion, non-violent civil disobedience, and very supportive movement, and knowing that there are thousands of people all over the world also taking direct action, non-violent action. And I do think this is the way forward. And we know that history has been through civil disobedience, non-violence, that has shifted things, be it the civil rights movement, be it that movement. And I feel now more hopeful after 30 years of campaigning that things could change. The other thing, I do think that the demand of telling the truth is really important, and realising that the society is being massively impacted by the ecological and climate crisis. And the more that we look at that and face it, the better we're going to be able to act from a place of understanding and wisdom. So I think for me, join a civil disobedience non-violent movement like Extinction Rebellion. And if that's not for you, keep telling the truth. Have those conversations, maybe MPs, but maybe also your neighbours and in your family. So more and more people really get it, that we all have to be active agents of change. And there's the new story about a life-sustaining society that we can make together.
I'll be the classic academic and give you 3 steps. Rather than first one, embed net zero policy across all levels and departments of government with strong leadership and coordination at the centre, including a climate cabinet with all the key players around the table who have access to the levers of power.
Your microphone may not be on, you're being waved at. Is that correct? Is that what you did? Yeah. Would you mind just talking about that?
That's okay. Did everyone hear that first point? Lots of nods. Good. We don't have to use the turning point technology. 2, make policy business friendly. It will be businesses that have to deliver most of our net zero target. So what we need to see is a clear and simple investable set of rules and incentives that leave room for businesses to innovate and find the most effective means of switching to low carbon solutions. And then 3, we need to put people at the heart of policy design, because over half of the emission cuts that we need to reach net zero targets are going to require you, me, everyone in this room and everyone out there across the UK to do things differently. So, in my opinion, the public must be engaged in the challenge of climate crisis, and both policy and low carbon products need to be designed to reflect this.
And Joe, as Director of Future and Natalie, final remarks over to you.
There's lots of policy suggestions that I'd like to make, but I'm not allowed to because a general election has been called. Charities under a general election can't talk about particular policies or legislation or parties they support. So I'm going to kind of skip on that question and say, I suppose, I'm kind of loath to bring this up again, but I think the cross-party element of this work, the net zero was a letter that was signed by politicians of all political persuasions, and that's what got that piece of legislation through. So for me, it's that cross-party work, and I think a decent number of people here have engaged with their MP, as the poll or hand showed earlier. But as I've said before, please do encourage your parents or your children or your sister, brother, friends. Please encourage them to write to candidates in the lead up to the election and ask them what their commitments are on climate change, and make sure that informs your voting. Hope for the Future has a whole list of hustings resources on our website for questions you can ask of candidates, hustings that you can organise. This is an incredible moment to be able to shift the priorities of our next government. So make sure that we can take hold of that opportunity and make sure that people that you are in contact with can take hold of that opportunity as well.
Right, that's exactly 8 p.m. And please join me in thanking not only our fantastic panelists, but also Robbie and Emma and everyone at Hope for the Future for their fantastic work on tonight's show.